So welcome to the ARM Mesa plenary session, the realities of bringing gene therapy products to market. I'm really excited about this panel today, and I woke up pretty pumped. You can see why, and it's really because I got a chance to put on a jacket for the first time in probably 9 months. But seriously, we have an amazing set of panelists here today that have a depth of experience, a breadth of experience, and a longevity of experience, not only in gene therapies, but also in other modalities as well. And we'll be able to dive into some of that as we go through here. Before I make some of the introductions, I wanted to thank ARM in particular for hosting this event, the entire event, not just this panel. It's obviously a very difficult time out there right now, and they've done an amazing job. Janet and her team are incredible people, and the session should be fantastic, and the meeting should be fantastic, even though it's virtual. I would encourage you to look at some of the webinar series for cell and gene therapy that are out there. There are some really good discussions on other topics as well. So I encourage you to do that. Let me quickly do some introductions to the panelists here. We have Lisa Deschamps from AveXis Novartis. She is a Senior Vice President, Chief Business Officer. She's responsible for strategic planning and worldwide commercialization of pipeline and inline assets across the extensive gene therapy portfolio within the Novartis Gene Therapies, which is formerly AveXis. Lisa was also head of the global neuroscience franchise as well, and she's had a 25-year career at Novartis. And her career spans, as I referenced before, not just gene therapy now, but also biologicals and small molecules in a variety of therapeutic areas. Interestingly, from her bio, she has not only garnered many industry awards, but she also has some philanthropic interests, including domestic violence and pediatric cancer. So I wanted to mention that. Braden Parker is SVP and General Manager, North America for Orchard Therapeutics. He joined Orchard in April of 2020. In this capacity, he's responsible for bringing Orchard's unique ex vivo autologous cell therapies and gene therapy products to market. He has 23 years of healthcare experience in varying roles commercially and in sales as well. He has commercialized several rare oncolytic and gene disorder products during his time at Celgene, NPS Pharma, which was ultimately acquired by Shire, and PTC Therapeutics. He was most recently VP and General Manager for US at PTC Therapeutics, leading the launch of DMD products. So, and then we have Jay Newman. He's got over 30 years of commercial experience in pharmaceutical and biotech industries. He works for Spark Therapeutics as head of US commercial. As head of US market access, Jay was directly involved in the development and directed the execution of Spark's innovative delivery model. So that's some exciting stuff we'll hear about. Previously, he led Biogen's payer and channel marketing team, including MS, hemophilia, and rare diseases. Prior to Biogen, Jay spent 24 years at Allergan in various roles in market access and sales leadership. Jay, interestingly, spent 5 years in the US Army, so he's a military guy, achieving captain rank, and he's a 2-time finisher of the New York City Marathon. Not an easy feat for sure, as I've run it myself once. I was a one and done.
Good run.
Congratulations for multiple. And then we have Jeff Ajer, EVP and Chief Commercial Officer at BioMarin. Jeff joined BioMarin back in August of 2005, so he's been there for quite a while. He served as, he currently is Executive VP and Chief Commercial Officer. He previously served as SVP and Chief Commercial Officer, and also served as VP of Commercial Operations in the Americas, responsible for commercial operations throughout the Americas and led marketing, reimbursement, sales operations. Prior to BioMarin, Jeff served in various roles at Genzyme, beginning in November 2003. His experience prior to Genzyme includes roles in sales and marketing and operations at Sangstat and ICN Pharmaceuticals. He's also a director at Nectar Therapeutics, which is a publicly traded company. So welcome to Lisa, Braden, Jay, and Jeff. Really excited about the next hour, or 55 minutes now that I've taken up some time. Let me just make a couple of quick opening remarks before diving into the first set of questions here. Some of the advances in gene and cell therapy over the last decade have been quite remarkable. We all know the stats, and you can see them on ARM's website in terms of the number of products and even some of their summarized clinical data. And really that time frame was 2010 to 2017 before we started hitting regulatory milestones with a very positive regulatory environment. But then came 2018 and now the environment we're in right now, which is incredibly exciting because it's the first opportunity for us to take these amazing therapeutic products and deliver them to broader populations, not just in clinical trials. With that came the challenges associated with a system broadly defined that is not geared toward one-time curative therapies for these devastated chronic diseases across many modalities, not just autologous therapies, but allogeneic therapies and the like. The system wasn't set up for payment models, for government policies and regulations, for manufacturing supply chain, hospital system readiness and capacity. And so these are the things we're facing right now. And across many diseases, SMA, DLBCL, ALL, NHL, retinal genetic disorders, hemophilia A and B, sickle cell, MPS, ADA, SCID, TDT. These are all products that are on the verge of trying to help these patients in need. Quick couple of stats though that suggest not only are the products that are represented by the panelists here today challenged by, but the system is going to be challenged. And these people are the leaders that are going to set the stage for future products. At the end of 2019, there were over 1,000 clinical trials for gene and cell therapy products. FDA anticipates that in 2020, there are going to be 200 new INDs per year. That's obviously something we can look at as to whether the prediction came true. The FDA also said they expect 10 to 20 approvals per year by 2025. And another piece of data is that by 2030, 500,000 patients in the US are expected to be treated by cell and gene therapy products. All of this saying that we've got obviously a wave of products coming forward, but the pioneers are on this call. Some of the challenges and opportunities they've faced are what we want to get into to be able to set the stage for the future evolution and commercialization of these products to get to broader and broader markets, as that's ultimately our collective goal is to reach patients on a broader base with these amazing therapies. So with that as backdrop, what I'd like to do is start a couple of general questions, and maybe Lisa, I can start with you. Really just trying to understand how your company is leading the way in the commercialization of gene and cell therapies. Obviously, AveXis Novartis has two products that have been challenged in that way and have been treating patients. And then maybe what has been the hardest part about breaking through this paradigm that we're faced with? And then we can maybe go around the horn and get others' perspective on this as well.
Great, thanks, Jeff, for the question, and hello, everyone. You know, as you introduced the segment appropriately, there are certainly many challenges and, of course, many opportunities. As a Novartis organization and enterprise at large, we are committed to leading in cell and gene therapy. As you said, we have Zolgensma, Kymriah as well, which is cell therapy, and Luxturna in certain parts of the world. And we are really on a journey here, I think all of us together as certainly building an industry. As a Novartis gene therapy unit in particular, we are committed to redefining possibilities for patients and their families living with life-threatening genetic diseases. We're doing this today in SMA, spinal muscular atrophy, as the first asset in our portfolio, and we will continue to do it as we go forward with quite a large portfolio across neuromuscular disease as well as others as we go forward. God, what are the challenges? There are many, as we all know. You know, to your point earlier, these sort of therapies, not just the one-time transformative nature of them, but they really go against all the conventional norms in the system today, from the regulatory aspect to the science at the pace that it's going, and of course, not to mention the reimbursement and the need to get urgent treatment to patients. Many of these diseases are life-threatening. Our experience, and again, SMA is no different. Time is neurons. By the time a child is born, their neurons are already starting to die. So you can't wait 18 months for reimbursement to get, you know, this therapy to a child. So there are many challenges, and all related to, I would say, the conventional systems that we have and the nature of these therapies and as they go against them, inclusive of the disease.
Great, thank you. Maybe Braden, we can get your opening comments on both those same questions, given that Orchard is obviously in an interesting time now with a deep pipeline and some therapeutics that are focused on the autologous side of things.
Yep. So first of all, thanks for having me on the panel. It's great to be with everyone here to kind of exchange ideas and thoughts on this really important topic. Orchard might be on the other end of the spectrum from Novartis in terms of size. We're a very small biotech, just 5 years old. And we're really dedicated to transforming the lives of patients that are living with rare genetic disorders. And unlike most of the gene therapy companies that you hear about in terms of having AAV in vivo type of delivery mechanism, we're really focused on pioneering ex vivo autologous hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy platforms. And so that really is interesting because it offers that same idea of terms of permanently correcting diseases potentially through a one-time administration. And so when you have really that, our initial focus has been around neurometabolic as well as primary immune deficiencies and some blood disorders as well, very rare disorders overall, and really our robust and comprehensive data set is pretty extensive in the industry because our founder has been working on this for a number of decades now. And really we have over 170 patients treated, up to 19 years of follow-up in some of the programs. So really you can see the potential of this HSC gene therapy platform, and really the success we've seen in clinic with some of the early, very rare diseases shows that as a proof of concept, there's applicability in larger, less rare diseases as well, which is what we're starting to explore overall. In terms of challenges, I think Lisa said it very well. There are a number of challenges, not the least of which, Jeff, you mentioned this as well in the intro, that we're entering or trying to enter into a system that isn't designed for any of these different products. So as you think about reimbursement, as you think about trying to provide broad access for patients, it really requires a system-wide evolution. So as we prepare in the pre-launch phase, really trying to work with the different stakeholders in the market to make sure that we can facilitate the entry of these unique products in a way, as Lisa mentioned, that's extremely timely, because much like the diseases that she mentioned, some of the neurometabolic diseases that we're working on, like MLD, is very time sensitive. Patients don't have time to wait. The treatment window opportunity is so small. So we need to make sure that we pave the way early such that that does not become a barrier and somebody misses an opportunity to have a great outcome. So those are some of the things that we're working on and some of the things that we're thinking about at Orchard.
Great, thanks, Braden. Maybe Jay, we can turn to you and get your initial thoughts on the same questions.
Sure, Jeff. First of all, thank you and to ARM for the opportunity to participate in this panel, and also nice meeting and working with Lisa, Jeff, and Braden over the last couple of weeks. Couple things. First of all, I need to state that the opinions that I'm going to articulate are my own and not necessarily part of my employer, Spark Therapeutic, which is part of the Roche Group. In terms of the leadership piece, I mean, that's an easy one for us. We were the first to get gene therapy approved in the US. And just by virtue of doing that, one of our company values is creating the path and breaking barriers. So we really set forth not just to bring the first gene therapy out, but we were also challenged by our senior leadership, namely Jeff Marazzo, our CEO, into not take an easy way out. We're going to do it differently and innovatively. And it is innovative of the science and the therapy of Luxturna is. We wanted to be as innovative as we possibly could on the payment side, knowing we were going to be the first ones to come out with a durable, a potentially durable, potentially one-time treatment. And we came up with the Spark Path, and that's one of the things that we're really proud about. You mentioned it as part of the biography up front, and we'll get into the details about that as we move forward and the questions allow for it. I think that the hardest, most difficult part of what we're all doing is never underestimating the resistance to change. All the stakeholders, at least I see you shaking your head. As a matter of fact, one of my mentors is a guy named Mike Ball, who was the head of Alcon, which I'm sure you know of him or have met him, probably one of the best leaders I ever saw. And he coined that term a long time ago. And it's so true, is the very stakeholders, us included, all say we need change to accommodate these new agents. But what I have found in the last 4 years of working through it, nobody's really willing to move off their dogma, their processes, and their positions in terms of accommodating change that's needed. The analogy I like to say is that the gene therapy and cell therapy are Teslas, and CMS is only equipped to service and support a Model T. And at some point, the Tesla is going to need some help. And if we don't get help from the policymakers and frankly everybody else in the ecosystem, gene therapy isn't going to reach its full potential, which is one of Spark's aspirational goals.
Great, thank you, Jay. We'll come back to some of those themes, in particular the breaking barriers and the resistance to change here in a minute. But Jeff, maybe you can comment on the same questions. You guys have obviously been in the severe genetic disease or field for a while, at least the rare disease for a while, not only in gene therapy, but other modalities as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the two questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And thanks to ARM and my fellow panelists for the opportunity to be here with you today. You've heard really great insights from the panelists, and I'm going to try not to overlap those comments. In terms of leading the way in commercialization of gene and cell therapies, the first observation is that there's been relatively few that have made it to market so far, and congratulations to those of you that have been a part of that. BioMarin is not there yet with our hemophilia A gene therapy program, but we are in late stage phase 3. So the people that go first have a unique set of challenges of paving the way, but also I believe setting the pattern for those to come. So not only do we have a responsibility for the success of our individual programs and companies, but I believe more broadly, how we do this sets the pattern for all of the rest of the therapies that will come behind. And I believe as a longtime member of this industry, the people aren't in this just for the programs and the companies that they're working for. They're in this for broader reasons in terms of doing things that advance care for people that require care. So we've got some unique responsibility there. In terms of what is the hardest, most challenging thing, I think that I would flip that on its head a little bit and say, eventually, these things that are the most challenging are also going to prove to be the most rewarding for us. So introducing new technology, and this is not simple new technology. This is maybe akin to when recombinant proteins hit the scene and later monoclonal antibodies. So there's a lot of education required for stakeholders. Those stakeholders start with prescribers and patients, but they also go to payers as commercial stakeholders. And our experience to date is that those stakeholders are really thirsty and wanting knowledge and education. And they have to have that knowledge and education to facilitate good decision making. But again, this is not simple stuff. So it's gonna take a little bit of effort. And here again, being pioneers, I think we have an opportunity to do this and pave the way for those programs and products that come next. And then being one-time durable treatments, this is kind of very disruptive, game-changing. And I would echo the comments that I've already heard about a system that is designed to facilitate, in large part, chronic treatments and not one-time durable treatments. And you mentioned that BioMarin has been active for a long time in the development and treatment of rare diseases. So we're very accustomed to commercializing chronic therapies. So the change starts with us, but the system needs to evolve as well. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we can then use this to pivot to a question that speaks to the different size of the companies, because we've got an interesting mix of small companies that were acquired and now are part of larger organizations. We certainly have on the smaller side, Braden, you certainly represent that with Orchard, and then BioMarin is somewhere kind of in the middle. Maybe speaking to the breaking barriers piece of this, because I think that's a really important topic, and we'll come back to that for sure on the pricing and reimbursement side of things. But how you think you're positioned as a small company, a large company, the advantages and disadvantages you think your organization brings to the table to break down these barriers. And maybe if you can give an example or two of how that's come to fruition, or what you anticipate if you haven't yet reached that level. So let me start maybe, Jay, with you, if that's okay, and get your thoughts on this topic of, since you brought up breaking the barriers, and how you think you're advantaged given the position you're in, part of a larger organization, but also a small entity that grew up in this field.
Yeah, well, we're still actually a small entity. As most of you know, is that it isn't Roche's style to come in and kind of, take over the whole operation. They're going to take a step back and understand what the opportunity is for us to continue to be a separate operating company underneath their umbrella, which is what has been communicated publicly. I think there's two ways of looking at it. The first piece is the startup experience. It's my first one. It was actually my first experience in rare disease as well. And I can tell you that starting with a whiteboard and not talking about what we can't do, but what we should and can do was really, really important. And we did have the luxury, in full disclosure, that we could do just about anything we wanted to do because we didn't have a whole portfolio of chronic medications that some of the decisions we could be making on the gene therapy side could be problematic for the other side of the portfolio. Again, because we're jamming everything into a 100% upfront payment model, regardless of whether it's a gene therapy that has potential durability for a number of years all the way out to a lifetime versus a monthly chronic care product. So we had the ability to not have to worry about that whole other piece that, Lisa, I'm sure you guys have to worry about on a regular basis, as well as other companies with big portfolios in terms of managing the government pricing and AMP exposure. So we had the ability to do that. And I think that helped us tremendously. Plus the fact that we were number one, and we got a lot of attention from the payers. As a matter of fact, we flexed on 21st century cures. We were able to go in a pre-approval time period with product level information, not branded, not making claims, just simply talking about investigational Veretagine, Naparvovec. And we're able to get the payers, public and commercial, get an understanding of the data and the endpoints and the disease. And the third piece was the data was amazing, right? So we have the regular clinical endpoints that would be appropriate for an inherited retina disease, which, by the way, most people don't know anything about, including the payers, nor should they, because there's about 200,000 patients in the US, probably 2,000 are eligible for treatment. But what was important about it was Spark worked very closely with the FDA, and we had an endpoint called the MLMT, the multiluminance mobility test, which was essentially a manifestation of the FST, which was the ability to see dimmer light measured. And the MLMT was basically not a patient-related outcome, but a manifestation of the feature of the drug, the ability to see lower levels of light, and it manifested into better mobility. So we had great data that was also videoed. So we had videos of trial participants, pre-treatment, post-treatment, and the ability to navigate the MLMT was just off the charts. So we had, you know, a number of different things. Being a first, sometimes it's really, really difficult, and it certainly was difficult, but we had a lot of things that I think either we did right or worked in our favor that enabled the success that we have. And now, as we move into being part of the Roche group, you know, slowed down, integration has been slowed down with the, given the COVID situation that we have, the pandemic, but we're looking for bigger opportunities to more efficiently advance gene therapy now that we're part of the Roche group.
Yeah, maybe we can come back to that in a second, but since Lisa, he called you out on maybe Novartis having different issues relative to being a small company. Obviously, AveXis was a small company, and it started from a similar starting point as Spark did. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. How the small company environment is a benefit to you, as Jay just referenced, and yet how a larger pharmaceutical organization, how you're leveraging that in this world of change.
Thank you. And, you know, I think I would just start with first by, to Jay's point, we are all learning by trial versus experience in this area. That is true whether you're a small startup or an acquired company, you know, becoming the company of the larger enterprise. It's just true for all of us. And with that comes all the challenges, as we discussed earlier. And in a sense, you become the poster children, let's say, collectively. And so, you know, from my team, actually, in my previous role, where we did the acquisition, and we had a lot of discussion at the time as to what was the right operating model for AveXis as the organization was going to be acquired, and then of course once it was finalized. And we really believed that the magic, you know, maybe to Jay's point, comes in, you know, the independence in a sense of the incubation, right, that startup company was working on, and all the capabilities and mastery that was being built. And so we made a very conscious decision to maintain the independence of the AveXis operating model, while seeing where it made sense to really leverage the strength of the greater organization. And I believe in that implicitly. It is about the balance of the two, right? And I think to Jay's point, you know, kind of having an opportunity too as the parent company to digest and understand and learn about the, you know, the organization either you're partnering with or acquiring is a key critical part of the journey, because you don't want to interfere in any way of the magic that is going on. And at the same time, you want to see where you can, you know, synergize and leverage the strength of the greater organization. I would say also, when I think about, you know, kind of the evolution of the work that was going on from a commercialization standpoint, it gave us the opportunity, in having the scale of a large global player like Novartis, to really work towards geographically expanding. And so I think about what we're proud of. You know, I mean, there's so many things. Most importantly, having had the opportunity to treat over 600 patients as of June of this year with Zolgensma through clinical trials, our managed access program, which we launched in the US prior to launch, and then worldwide after, which is a compassionate use program where we've committed to giving 100 free doses of Zolgensma each year to patients all around the world. I mean, that is something we would not have been able to do if we were a startup organization. Now, that is also something that gets a lot of criticism, because it's not doing it in the very traditional way we normally do in offering programs like this as large manufacturers and for large disease areas. In addition, you know, manufacturing scalability getting to the point where we can bring scalable manufacturing, not only for the launch in one market, but for a launch in many markets. We've had to date regulatory approvals in the US, and then this year in Japan, in Europe, and now most recently in Brazil. So we're already in our 4th market. We expect 4 more approvals in other markets around the world between now and the end of the year and first quarter of next year. So the geographic expansion is also something that I think, again, leveraging the strength of the larger organization, we may have struggled more difficulty with as a smaller startup organization that didn't have the footprint, the expertise, capabilities, et cetera. And then I would say the same is true from an access perspective, similar to what Jeff mentioned. We have had amazing success in access in the launch of Zolgensma in the US. Over 95% of commercial lives are covered. We're seeing about 86–90% of government lives covered. And in addition, in our launch in Europe, we have had the opportunity to have a program called our Day One Access Program, where we were able to launch at the time of CHMP, as an example, a Day One initiative where it allows the different markets, different countries to maintain the integrity of their normal pricing and reimbursement framework, while at the same time, if they choose to, gaining access for their patients, given the urgency and the life-threatening nature of this condition. So these are the types of innovation that you're able to offer that we can feel really proud about. They're not easy by any means, and we can summarize them and make it sound simple, but for sure they're not. And we have an array of different types of access schemes, including a lot of risk share agreements. In the US, we have an agreement with Cigna in their Embark program and things like that. So a lot to be excited about. Certainly a lot of hard work that goes on, and again, innovation is something that is core, and really having the opportunity to reimagine medicine for patients living with genetic disease is something that drives us with purpose.
Great. I mean, it sounds like everything is going well. Obviously, with Luxturna and Zolgensma, there's been great success stories there. There clearly have been major barriers and hurdles to overcome, and you guys have been at the forefront of it. We'll come back to that on the pricing reimbursement, because I'd love to get into a little bit of not so much the success stories, because there have been plenty and it's wonderful to see, but what are the real challenges that the people watching this should be aware of and pay attention to going into a launch in particular. But maybe we can just go to Braden, the other extreme, which is a really, obviously a smaller company, and give your perspective similar to what Jay was describing with Spark on the advantages you think you have as a small company in pursuing the commercialization of these therapies. And I don't know if you have any specific examples of where a small company has benefited relative to a large, but I'd love to hear that if you do.
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing as a small company, and we're actually celebrating our 5-year anniversary this month, and we certainly have grown quite a bit in those first 5 years, particularly the last couple, but we're still a very small company. And I think the advantage of that is we're obviously extremely focused on our specific platform in terms of HSC gene therapy, and the advantages and opportunities that provides. It allows us to be versatile from a team perspective and really adapt one program to another as we're learning along the way, and be nimble as possible. I think the biggest challenge, and you guys may have faced it back in the early days of AveXis and Spark, is that our platform offers a lot of different opportunities to treat a lot of different diseases, but human and financial capital is very finite, and the resources around that are very finite. So you really do have to make trade-off decisions and difficult decisions on where you're going to place your bets and how you're going to go about commercializing products. And now, so we're in the pre-launch phase for MLD, and I have to say, it's been a huge advantage to look and see what you guys have done previously, because we have our idea of the world, and then you can start to test some of those hypotheses based on how the market is reacting. You mentioned earlier, Jay, change is hard and people resist change. And as you see some of these innovative ideas that come from an AveXis or a Spark, and you see them trying to be applied in the marketplace, you can start to see where the tension points might be. And so I think as we think about our business and commercializing, we have to think about where we're going to expend the most energy, resources, time, money. And for a disease state like MLD, which, as I mentioned earlier, has a very narrow treatment window opportunity, and as a small company, we've determined that you have to be incredibly collaborative and team up where possible in order to take a small company and amplify its voice in the marketplace to really affect the change. You can't break barriers. It's difficult to break barriers as a small company without kind of engaging other stakeholders along the way. So the example I would provide is, newborn screening is so incredibly important for all of these rare pediatric diseases, especially ones that have a narrow treatment window opportunity. You have to find these patients at the right time where they're going to be able to benefit from the innovative therapy that you're bringing to market. And so teaming up with other companies like BioMarin, Sarepta, Retrophin, as well as the Every Life Foundation, we're looking at ways to modernize the U.S. newborn screening system, look at ways that we can affect policy changes to make sure that there's an equitable access to newborn screening across America for every single baby, so we can identify those right patients that might benefit from these therapies. So teaming up with other companies, other stakeholders like the AveXis groups is an incredibly important aspect of what we're trying to do to commercialize today.
Great, thanks. Appreciate the perspective, Braden, and maybe Jeff, you can comment, given obviously the length of time that BioMarin has been in the rare disease space. This is obviously new, but how has BioMarin's experience and size, how do you see that being advantageous for you going forward in terms of the major barriers you expect to see?
It's a great question. And as we've been talking about the new disruptive things that we have to do, I think it's entirely appropriate to say, okay, what are the experiences and the resources that we have in place that we can use to leverage? So BioMarin has been in the business for over 20 years of discovering, developing, and now marketing treatments for rare disorders. We've got 5 innovative chronic therapies on the market today that we commercialize globally. So you go back and you say, what are the things that we know how to do very well as an organization? Well, the discovery that led to bringing our program for hemophilia A into the clinic, and a team that is very accustomed to running global clinical trials, a regulatory team that's in place that knows how to navigate international and major market regulatory systems, we have people in place, we've got relationships in place, and then very fortunate to have a global commercial footprint and a team that's been out there developing relationships with payer systems, knowing how to launch and commercialize drugs. Launching new drugs, as everybody on this panel is aware, is a very challenging and difficult lift. And so having multiple experiences of doing that, I think, is a huge advantage as we think about all of the new and challenging things associated with a gene therapy product. So I'm very fortunate to be able to leverage that kind of expertise and resources to do this.
Great, thanks. I'm going to use that to go into the conversation about market access and reimbursement and all the unique models that are out there today, which is really encouraging. I will say that when I was at Bluebird, one of the interesting things is when we approached payers, and this might be a little controversial for the panel, but they were shocked that we were approaching them early, first of all, and with a risk on mindset, meaning company risk on, to the extent that they were very reticent even to get in conversations with other players that have been around for a while, because there was a lack of belief that they would engage in a way that was risk on and early engagement. And I'm just conveying what the payers told Bluebird at the time. So I'd love to hear from the panelists. How have you overcome that? There are so many challenges, and I'd love to hear the challenge that you were faced with that you pressed you the most as an organization. There are Medicaid best price challenges that we all know about. There is the challenge of not having in the clinical trials long-term data, and yet you're trying to price the value of the therapies over, if it's a chronic disease, over the life of that patient, but you don't have data to support it. This is an issue that, in particular, Dr. Sherman from Harvard Pilgrim has been talking about. He's a big believer in gene therapies, by the way, but this is one of the issues that he sees as a challenge. There's this reticence for payers to believe that you're going to engage in an authentic way because of whatever past history. I'd love to hear from each of you the biggest challenge you faced in the context of all these things we're facing, because you've just painted a pretty rosy picture just as a panelist group. It's not rosy, we know that. So give the audience here a sense of one major challenge that you faced, pick it, and say, here's what we had to do to overcome that. Given that the payer world is not ready for this, and maybe was at least originally reticent to engage for various reasons. Maybe I'll go back to Jeff, to you first, and give you an opportunity to speak to this, even though it's more forward-looking for you guys.
Well, it is forward-looking, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Jay and Lisa in particular on their views. But as you indicated, we have an opportunity here to be proactive with payers, and given some of the experiences we've seen in the past, I think proactivity is crucially important. I also want to make a nod to ARM and other cross-stakeholder efforts that have been put together, like MIT Newdigs and Duke Margolis, as a forum for trying to get out in front of some of these issues, and an ability to engage with stakeholders in kind of a broader sense and not a program by program sense. And I think that's been really helpful in terms of getting on the same page, cross stakeholder groups. And I'm going to point to the notion of being risk on as well as proactive as being the biggest challenge. And you're right, in the United States, there's a number of constraints, and it's all around CMS and government pricing rules. So I think it's a challenge to find a way to go out to payers and with credibility say, here's our offering and here's how we're going to be risk on with this. Outside of the United States, where I would say in general, navigating price and reimbursement systems is much more challenging than in the US. But outside of the United States, there's this kind of silver lining there where you can negotiate with payer systems and come to solutions that, that can be bespoke. And BioMarin's approach on that is to approach these payer systems outside of the United States in particular and say, well, what are your needs and desires, and how can we participate in a risk-on way? And to address, for example, relevant questions about durability of these products that probably won't be answered in total for many years to come. And so I've been gratified that we've been able to have productive conversations with international payers about structures that might work for them, whether that's some kind of a risk-sharing agreement around outcomes, or it's a pay over time model, or it's, we haven't gotten there yet, but perhaps a subscription type of model could be in place. So we're taking the approach of saying, what are the needs and desires of the payer systems, and how can we fashion a solution that will work best for you and also facilitate the treatment of patients. Thank you.
Great. So maybe we'll just go in reverse order to what from the last question. So Braden, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that. And again, I'd love to get into this and really give the audience a sense of the biggest challenge you either anticipate or that you faced or are facing.
Right, and maybe at the risk of sounding rosy, contradict your earlier statement, I think maybe some of the work that you guys did, as well as the other companies represented here, I feel that there's a shift in mindset, quite frankly. When we go out and talk to payers, I do think they're eager to learn. I think they're really seeking as much information as early as possible to best prepare, because I think they all see now quite clearly, and maybe it's the work of all of these other stakeholder groups that Jeff mentioned as well, which I also applaud in getting in front of it, but I think they see quite clearly now that there is a wave of innovation about to crash upon the shore, and the idea that we can no longer change or we can wait to see, I think is beginning to erode, because there's just going to be too much innovation too quickly. You mentioned some of the statistics early on in your opening comments. So I definitely see a willingness of payers to want to engage and think about creative models. They often look to us to say, well, what are some of your ideas on how we do that? But I think the big frustration is even these conceptual conversations, and maybe this will bear out with what Lisa and Jay will say, is still impeded by the unknown of kind of the old model and the system that is kind of blocking the innovation of some of these payment models, because you have these outstanding issues with best price or anti-kickback or other things that could be perceived in a certain way. So I think there's a reticence for folks to engage full bore at this point in some of these different arrangements, because there's still that unknown. And I think once you solve for some of the unknowns and de-risk the prospect of having a value-based agreement, I think you're going to see, you know, a flood of them in the marketplace, but we're just not there yet overall, in my opinion.
Great, thanks. Again, we'll go in reverse order. I think, Lisa, if you could comment in particular on the challenges that you still see ahead. I mean, if there are any challenges you face that you're particularly proud of, and really give a sense of how challenging it was, but the challenges you still see ahead of you that are barriers to either adoption or future products, I think it'd be great to hear that, given that both you and Jay have been in the market for a while and have these experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, look, there are many twists and turns to the story. So don't be disillusioned to your point that this is in any way easy. And there will be many twists and turns as we go, because while we have approvals in the 4 markets that I mentioned, you know, in the ex-US markets, you know, to the points mentioned by Jeff, you know, the reimbursement bodies are all different. The requirements are all different. The systems are inflexible, right? So HTA market is an HTA market, and the qualities are the lowest in the world in the UK, you know, at 20 to 30,000 versus, you know, up to 150 in the US. So we will face those challenges, and we're just in the crux of that. And so, you know, I would say the challenges are that again, not to keep repeating, but the frameworks are not in place. So countries outside of France who has a program, an ATU program, where it allows for life-threatening conditions, and they actually have a formal way to provide access to their citizens where they deem appropriate, and then worry about the reconciliation on the back end, right? When the final P&Rs go, it could be years later. They're set up for that. They've been doing it for years. In the rest of the European Union, they do have laws that allow for importation of life-threatening conditions. That doesn't mean anyone wants to pay for it, right? And so that still doesn't, you know, preclude you having to make arrangements and agreements, whether that's patient by patient or, you know, a cohort of patients. So I would say, in addition to the, you know, to the comments just mentioned, the appetite for other types of innovative access schemes like risk sharing, pay for performance, even installment plans or retrospective type, you know, or deferral payments, the accounting of that and the administrative burden of that is not somewhere we're advanced to. Even in the US, we're coming along slowly. In fact, some markets like Germany might be more advanced, or Israel, than we are in this country, because there's a quite extensive administrative burden on doing that. So you're almost forced as an industry to kind of come back down to that straight discount model, which doesn't, you know, further the conversation along. And to your point, we do have, in rare disease in general, you will always have thin data sets. So in absence of having, you know, robust, tremendous long-term longitudinal data, when you get into an HTA market with a 20 or 30,000 quality, you're thinking, how am I ever going to, you know, make this possible, right? So the challenges are there, and the constant, you know, convention of those challenges continue. I would say, you know, where we have seen an additional stress to this is the crowdfunding. I mean, I've launched 15 therapies, many orphan or specialty in my career. I've never seen crowdfunding like I've seen. And that, we hate that, right? From a reputational perspective, it's bad. From a just emotional, ethical, everything that goes along with it. And again, you're back to, we would love to find a way to help provide access to a patient in need or a family in need. And these families have become very vocal and mobilized, and you know, really that's where you see, in a sense, the tension in the system. It kind of goes back to where we started, which is until you have some sort of crisis or some sort of trigger to mobilize the stakeholders, you don't see it naturally. And in our case, we have seen a lot of these families that have become very motivated, or the community at large as an advocacy community become very mobilized. That's where you'll see an appetite for a country to sign an early access agreement, you know, and still maintain the integrity of their framework. So these are every day, every minute challenges. The Day One Access program that we again launched at the time of the CHMP was born out of the challenges that we were facing and all the things we see. We continue to be, you know, faced every day with pleading, you know, families, can you, you know, do a plan with us? And we can't do that, right? We're not in the business of doing arrangements directly with families, and that's hard, right? It's hard to say no, and it's hard to continue to maintain the path of trying to help the greater good as opposed to a patient by patient. So these are everyday tensions in the system, and you know, not without you know, twists and turns along the way. So more to come.
Great, thank you. Jay, maybe you can give, I think you're mostly focused on, I'm not mistaken, on the US markets. Maybe give a perspective on this topic in the US markets and where either you faced major challenges and overcome them, and what barriers you see remaining.
Yeah, how are we doing on time, Jeff? I want to make
Yeah,
sure.
we've got about 10 more minutes, so maybe after this, I'll wrap it up with one last question. We can go rapidly around.
Okay, there's a topic I could probably talk easily for 10 minutes on. So yeah, this is a very, I'm very passionate about this very topic, because as I said right up front, never underestimate the resistance to change. And the very stakeholders that claim they want change aren't really moving, in my opinion, as fast or at all to accommodate the changes that they claim they want to see. And I know that's a really strong statement, but I can give you our example, and really what one of the biggest challenges we had with Luxturna, not just all the challenges we talked about, but inherited retina disease. As we said, there's about 200,000 folks in the US that suffer from it, probably about 2,000 that are actually treatment eligible. So it's a really small disease in a small population. But to add to the complexity is that there are no direct medical costs associated with it, because essentially before Luxturna, these patients were diagnosed, probably not genetically tested, and told to go home and live a life of blindness or low vision. And that's what they did. And so when we looked at the 15 epidemiology studies that are out there, and we looked at only at 15, and we looked at the natural history, and we looked at the claims data, we're in a really tough spot, which really accentuated why we had to do something so different. And for the folks in the audience, and I'm sure my panel members would attest to this, if you're out and you are looking to bring one of these therapies to market, the best thing I could tell you is get into either the senior vice president or somebody in the C-suite at the payer level, at the health plan level, that are managing complex care, to include transplants. And if those health plans aren't doing it, you might want to, we had a lot of traction with the health plans that moved gene therapy out of traditional pharmacy and medical and into complex care, which were cancers and transplants. And it really helped because there's just a different level of accommodation to the patient journey, which we all know with cell and gene therapy is much more complex. It's not just give them a script, send it to the mail order, or take it to CVS, or go to your doctor and be infused or injected and you're good to go. So when we went out and we got into the C-suite, or we got into the senior vice president level, what we heard consistently were two things, and this is pre-launch. Take the markup out of the system because it's not sustainable with a one-time gene therapy product. And number two, but a distant number two, stand behind the product, right? And so we weren't surprised by that. We heard that virtually from every health plan. Some cared more about the outcomes than others, but consistently there was a big concern about buy and bill and markup. So we said, okay, well, this is great. Probably not a surprise. But when you start to do the math against the traditional markups in the hospital outpatient setting, which all of our products are going to be delivered for the most part, with the exception probably of potentially hemophilia, everything's going to be delivered in the outpatient or inpatient setting. And we know that those are the settings where the payers are most vulnerable to the hospitals because of consolidation, et cetera. So we were surprised when we went out. We have 10 treatment centers. At the time, we had 8. And we were surprised that half the treatment centers in the pre-launch phase actually, for different reasons, told us that we needed to figure out a way to get them the drug without them doing buy and bill. They weren't interested in buying, taking the risk, doing the markup for PR reasons. So we actually had to develop something that would get the drug there without them buying it. And so, the obvious choice would be a traditional white bag. But I said to myself, and we said as a team, well, if we do a traditional white bag, hospitals hate that. That's not going to work well. We ended up coming up with a modified white bag where our friends at Accredo administer our program. And essentially what's happening is the Spark Path, we were able to leverage our ability to get the payer the drug at WAC price, no markups, no markup from the SP, no markups from the provider. We were able to get them the drug markup free, and we leveraged that to get coverage in line with FDA labeling. So our coverage is over 93% and has been for a while in commercial, over 86%, but not in line with the trials, in line with the actual FDA label, which was pretty exciting. But we also asked them, not a term and condition, but a rep and warrant, that they needed to pull the providers into the solution. And that's a big piece that's missing. The providers are dug in for the most part, probably 2/3 of them, on buy and bill because that's their revenue stream. And the payers are dug into no buy and bill. And what we're trying to do with the Spark Path is to say, all right, if we're saving $100, let's not throw pennies at the provider. Let's give them a piece of the savings. And that's not us saying it, because we can't sit at that table, but that's what we envisioned happening. And then to a degree that does happen, but not in certainly a cooperative manner. Getting a payer, a treatment center together at the table is like getting the Hatfields and McCoys or Democrats and Republicans together. It's not an easy prospect. So even though we believe Spark Path is great and a great program, it's a great start, but there's a number of things that still need to be dealt with. One is there are too many people in the business of buying and selling medications, marking them up, and collecting more money in many cases than what we actually charge or what we net, and then point the finger at us and tell us that we're the bad guy, right? So that's problem one. Problem two is the system is set up. Every payer, with the exception of one, would not take an invoice from us and pay a drug. They had to have a claim. They didn't say whether it was we won't do it or we can't do it. But if you think about how perverse that is, the reliance on a claim means that some intermediary that doesn't need to touch the drug but has the ability to file a claim, like the hospital, like the physician's office, like the specialty pharmacy, is now empowered to do so. So they take the drug from us, hit us with, and I'm not saying they do that, but we know the game. So we're actually empowering, by the health plan's inability or unwillingness to figure out a different way to buy the drug from us versus a claim, is a huge issue. Then the government pricing stuff that we talked about. And then last but not least, and we see this all the time, every state has some crazy RX drug laws that either, if a drug comes in labeled for a patient, it's considered a prescription. It either needs to stop at a specialty pharmacy within that state, unpacked, inspected, repacked, and pushed on to the treatment center that literally could be across the street, or they have these adulteration laws where if a script comes in, a product comes in a pharmacist in a hospital, if it comes in from out of the state, the pharmacist in the hospital can't even thaw and dilute a product. And so there's a lot of systemic issues, and going back to the theme of change that needs to happen, and everybody, including us, need to move off our positions in order to accommodate these gene and cell therapies, or they'll never reach their full potential.
Maybe I can, that's a great set of challenges and issues that the field is going to be faced with going forward. I think we're just about out of time. Maybe I can use that. We've obviously had some great success stories. The panelists here, thank you so much for your time, both in preparation for this and then your comments and insights throughout this hour. I'd love to get maybe one final comment from each of you, and if you can keep it really brief, a couple of sentences, that would be great, which is, what advice would you have for a company that is pre-commercial, anticipating a product going forward? Just one piece of advice for them as we wrap up this panel, and then I'll come back at the very end and wrap it up. So maybe Jay, since you were on a roll there, why don't you take it, and we'll go from Jay to Lisa, Jeff, and then Braden. Why don't you take the final?
I'll say that we did this, and I won't say it was easy, but it was okay to fly the plane while you were building it, and we had the payers, patients, and treatment centers on board. So don't be afraid of that.
Great. Lisa.
I would say buckle your seatbelt. It's going to be an amazing and wild ride.
Wonderful. Jeff?
Thanks, Jeff, for the opportunity. Final comment would be, expect a lot of challenges, expect setbacks, and don't be put off by them. Go back, keep coming back. We're going to get it right eventually.
And I'll just wrap up by saying and amplifying that comment, which is, when you face those setbacks, when you think about the barriers and kind of the daunting task, don't lose sight of the patient overall, because at the end of the day, that's why we do all of this, and solving that Rubik's Cube to get these patients the therapies that they need, that they're demanding, that they want, that are innovative and potentially transformative is critically important.
Great.
Nothing can compare to that one story, just one story that you hear that has changed somebody's life. So Braden, well said.
Well said indeed. Lisa, Jeff, Braden, Jay, thank you so much for spending the time here today. I think a theme that just came out of that is perseverance, patience, innovation, and keep that one patient center in mind, because that's what we're all here for. So much appreciated that you spent some of your time to give your insights here today, and I look forward to staying connected with you going forward. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jeff. Good working with you guys.